I'm Jill Barber. There's one bike ride my daughters have never let me forget. When they were younger, they didn't like walking very much, but we would go on bike rides as a family. And on one memorable occasion, our younger daughter fell off her bike into this massive ditch full of stinging nettles. She was screaming, those nettles. I panicked. I jumped off my bike, thought dock leaves, that's what I need, dock leaves. So I ran, I found some dock leaves, and I started shoving the dock leaves down the back of her trousers, down her pants. And she was mortified. She said she would rather put up with the stinging nettles than have her mother stuff dock leaves down her pants. She's never let me forget it.
When I was engaged to be married to Conrad, the year I was engaged, we decided to go on a cycle trip along the disused railway track from Scarborough to Ravenscar. It was a beautiful day and most of it was uphill, but on the way back it was downhill, and I took a corner just slightly too quickly and ended up sliding down a dike. I said to Conrad, "Help, help!" And he said, as he got off the bike and came towards me, he saw these two black legs disappearing down the dike. I went head first down there. He was laughing so much, he couldn't even help me out. He just stood there at the top of the pathway, just laughing his head off. And I said, "Look, can you take me out?" And then laughed afterwards. So that was my worst biking experience.
Every family's got a story about a bike, and mine's to do with my sister Sue, who had this brilliant green bike, three-wheeler with a green bin on, and she loved it, but she got too big for it, so she graduated to my bike. But my bike didn't have stabilisers on, so our house was on a bit of a hill. So one morning she wanted to learn to ride the bike, so I took her to the top of our street. It was called Georgiana Street, and I put her on the bike and held the seat. Well, she says for about 2 seconds, but actually it was longer than that, and I just let her go, and she learned how to ride the bike. She says today she's still traumatised by it, but I think she's a great bike rider.
Growing up as a young lad with an elder brother, I was keen to follow in his footsteps in many ways, including cycling. Here's a picture of me with my very first bike. Sometime later, I got a proper bike with stabilizers and all was great. All was great until my dad said, "It's really time for the stabilizers to come off." "But don't worry," he said, "as you start off without stabilizers, I'll run alongside you and hold the saddle steady." And so I set off, and all was great. All was great. All was so great that I turned round to smile at my dad, only to find with horror that he was now stood some way back, waving appreciatively at me. I fell off. Eventually, I forgave him, and eventually I mastered cycling without stabilizers, I'm glad to say.
One of my early memories about riding a bike is being pushed along the road by my granddad as I was trying to learn how to balance the bike and have that moment of confidence and faith in terms of letting go and getting on with it by myself.
I'm not really a cyclist. In fact, I didn't learn to ride a bicycle until I was in college many years ago, and I've not ridden since, unless you count going to spinning classes at the gym. But I'm really excited to hear more about how all we can is using bicycles to make a difference.
So my favourite bike memory has got to be, I think, when we were growing up and we lived in the woods with my family and I and my brother. We lived in the woods, and my dad one day came home for me and my brother with these two Yamaha BMXs. And these Yamaha BMXs, they weren't your carbon fibre kind of BMX. They were your solid steel, rugged BMX. And we used to ride them up and down our country lanes, doing jumps off the potholes and it's kind of doing these skids and always challenging ourselves to see if we could ride up this bumpy country lane, which wasn't tarmacked, but without holding onto the handlebars.
During lockdown, I decided to get my old bike out of the garage. and clean it up so that I could use it again. So I spent a day getting it all ready. And then on the Saturday, I decided to go out for a ride. There are a lot of steep hills where we live, so I thought just a short one would do. So I did a 4-mile ride, but when I got back, I was absolutely exhausted. My wife was so worried she thought she'd have to call the doctor. There's so many steep hills around here, so I've decided that I'm going to treat myself to an electric bike.
The most lasting memories of bike rides have been in recent days when the hills of Yorkshire got a bit too much for us, and we left our bikes in Scotland where we had a flat, and each summer when my wife was alive we went to Scotland, took our bikes, took the ferry over to Cymru and rode round the island. Some of my best memories are riding around the island. It's not a hard ride, it's only about 15 miles, mainly flat, and there are plenty of places to stop for ice cream and tea, but it was a wonderful feeling, and every time I remember that, or every time I go to Cymru now, I think of those great days of riding bikes.
When I was just a wee tyke and I joined the Scouts, I remember one weekend we took our bikes out to France. I remember cycling on dunes, belting out tunes and campfire songs as we pedalled along tracks and roads, carrying loads of stuff packed into panniers, packed to the brim. My mum and dad had bought the bike for me especially. I remember feeling free, my passport stamped. At nights we camped in farmers' fields, and then merrily we'd roll along, wind in face, sweat on brow, and how we laughed and sang, and how we cycled, and how the world changed, and how we changed as we ranged free when I was just a wee tyke riding my bike in France.